trying to make the persuasive case that Ambassador Koh referred to in favor of the proposition that the Palestinians should secure recognition of an independent state along the 1967 borders from the United Nations. By the 1967 borders, we're talking about the territory that was captured and occupied by Israel in the Six-Day War of June 1967, which encompasses the territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. These are the three major territories that the Palestinian Authority would like to see incorporated into an independent Palestinian state. And let me say up front, though this debate may be framed in very sharp black and white terms, there are a range of perspectives within each camp, within both the Israeli and the Palestinian camp. So what I'll be presenting and defending today is merely the mainstream perspective, the perspective that's been advanced and argued by the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas. And I do believe that is the right position to take, and I'm going to lay out my case. The way I'm going to approach this is by addressing three major categories of objections that Israel and to some degree the United States has raised in opposition to the notion of securing recognition for the creation of an independent Palestinian state from the UN. These objections fall into three distinct categories. Number one, security-related considerations that Israel has raised to oppose the bid by Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority to go to the UN to seek recognition of an independent Palestinian state. Also be addressing the flaws of the peace process and why that left the Palestinian Authority with virtually no other choice but to take their case to the UN. And thirdly, I'll be countering the often stated claim by Israel that this UN bid is premature. So first, addressing the security-related considerations or objections that Israel has raised. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said time and time again that peace must be anchored in security. And the logical implication of this is that Israel cannot simply hand over the keys to the West Bank to President Mahmoud Abbas without ironclad, without firm and comprehensive security guarantees. Otherwise, Israel's security would be placed in mortal danger. To this effect, Israel makes the claim that at its narrowest point, it's only 9 miles wide, and therefore it's uniquely vulnerable. And so Israel uses this as a justification for arguing that it simply cannot afford to retreat to the 1967 borders as the Palestinians demand. Instead, Israel needs to hold on to strategically significant areas of the West Bank to accommodate its legitimate security requirements. To counter this, though, I'd argue that even though Israel has legitimate security needs, as does any other state, that Israel is often overzealous in pursuit of these security needs. That Israel oftentimes tries to maintain its security at the expense of Palestinians' inalienable human and national rights. In other words, security is often used as a pretext for carrying out a range of policies which are motivated by objectives completely unrelated to security. So I'll give you a prime example of this. Let's examine the way that the separation wall was constructed. Recall that the separation wall was originally justified in security grounds. The idea was to build this barrier that would separate Israel from the West Bank and prevent the entry of Palestinian suicide bombers into Israel. Okay, now if this wall had been constructed within Israel, it would have served that legitimate purpose. But unfortunately, the way the wall was routed, it was routed in such a way that the heart of the wall was built within the West Bank, encroaching on Palestinian territory and effectively absorbing an enormous chunk of Palestinian land into Israel. So in retrospect, when you look at the way that the wall was, when you look at where the route of the separation barrier was drawn, it seems like in retrospect, it was nothing more than a massive land grab that was pursued under the convenient guise or justification of security. Also, Israel doesn't necessarily need to maintain a long-term military presence on the ground in the Palestinian territories to advance its security. Because after all, in the past, Israel has built very effective and workable and durable security arrangements with both Syria and Egypt without stationing a single Israeli military personnel on the ground in those territories over the long haul. So it seems like Israel's security arrangements with Syria and Egypt create a precedent that Israel could easily build upon in devising and crafting effective security arrangements with the Palestinians. And most importantly, I would submit to you that Israel's notion of security is a very ethnocentric and selective one that ignores the Palestinians' own legitimate security needs. Israel oftentimes carries out aggressive actions in the name of security that violate the Palestinians' human rights in an egregious fashion. So Israel's security cannot be at the expense of Palestinians' human rights. Rather, Israel must come around to the viewpoint that its security and the Palestinian security are mutually dependent, are interdependent. And therefore, the only best long-term guarantee for Israeli security is if they withdraw from the occupied territories, retreat to the 1967 borders, end the occupation, and establish a just and equitable state. A just and equitable two-state solution. Israel has so far been resistant to doing so. And so now that I've established that that in many cases Israel's security needs are over-exaggerated or misguided, or it pursues its security in very misguided ways, I'd like to get into a discussion of the peace process. Because after all, it's only due to the perception that the peace process has not worked in any meaningful way for the Palestinians that prompted them to turn to the UN. Now, the key problem here, and I think you could reasonably say what the fatal flaw of the peace process is the US has not lived up to its word to be an even-handed and impartial mediator. According to one of former President Clinton's former advisors, named Aaron Miller, the US has consistently acted more like Israel's advocate or lawyer than an honest broker. Now, at the beginning of his administration, at the beginning of Obama's administration, there was a ray of hope that that Obama would approach the peace process in a more balanced and even-handed fashion. And he made some very noble commitments in the speech that he gave in Cairo early in his presidency. Namely, he vowed that the U.S. would not turn its back on the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for dignity, opportunity, and a state of their own. However, Obama has failed to make good on that promise. And nowhere is the inherent bias towards Israel on the part of the U.S. more apparent than with respect to the settlement issue. This is the ultimate illustration of the U.S.'s inability or unwillingness, perhaps more accurately, to be a fair mediator. At the very beginning of his presidency, Obama started stepping up the pressure on Netanyahu, on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and trying to induce Netanyahu to adopt a comprehensive settlement freeze in the West Bank and East Jerusalem.